All right, 1 second here. All right, 1 second here. All right, welcome to this Q&A. Again, I want to work on to this Q&A. So a few questions came up this week. Similar topic, and that was about kashrus. And people asking about different kashrus organizations. So always better to ask than just rely on any kashrus organization. There are obviously better kashrus organizations than others. There's some, sort of recently some, there's a kind of, let's say like this. If you have a kashrus organization that gives rabbinic supervision to a store, let's say, I don't know, restaurant or whatever, that's open on Shabbos. Now, that's highly problematic. Now, even if, let's say, the owner, let's say the owner's Jewish, very good. So let's say they have another partner, I don't know, that's not Jewish. So they make a deal, they're not getting any profit. Right? Now, Rabbi has a response on this that there's someone becoming religious, but he couldn't shut down on Shabbos. It was too hard for him to shut down on Shabbos. So basically, he didn't get any benefit from the money, but he had to put up a sign. Basically, because the problem is let's say the name of the store or franchise or whatever has a Jewish sounding name. So if it's got a Jewish sounding name, it is what it is, but if it's open on Shabbos, it looks bad. It certainly looks bad. Now, you can't go by names in general. You could have Jewish sounding names and the person's not Jewish, but it doesn't matter. Let's say the person's Jewish, right? We'll make it easy. Let's say the person himself is Jewish. Okay. So this person, according to the question that was asked, the person themselves had difficulty shutting down on Shabbos. So they asked the question, what do I do? I can't close on Shabbos, right? Right now, he's not ready to close on Shabbos. He's becoming religious, but right now, we can't close on Shabbos. So what should he do? So essentially, Rabbi told him, first of all, he can't get benefit from the money, right? Certainly that's for sure, right? And so if you have, let's say, a non-Jewish partner, so you put up a sign and saying that you're not getting benefit from this. In other words, it's going to non-Jews, you're not getting any benefit from it, whatever. But how can let's say a kashrus organization give rabbinic supervision to a place that's open on Shabbos? That's highly problematic. That is very highly problematic. So, whatever person has to investigate, they can't investigate themselves, they should ask. Right? There is better rabbinic supervision than others. And some people have this idea that if it says it's kosher and it's a rabbinic organization, no matter how long they've been around for, you say, what's the problem? Like, what could be bad? Right? What could be bad? So if you don't check often enough and you do other things, what can happen is you can have all kinds of crazy mix-ups and different things that you're not aware of. That's why you pay money to a kashrus organization in the first place, right? So they have mashgichim there that's watching the place and going in and out, and put fear in the people there in order that they should be on the up and up, 100%, right? Otherwise, right? Otherwise, there's no fear. They can do whatever they want, and you know, you can't trust what people say. They do. You have to be on top of them, right? You have to come in opportune times when they don't think you're coming. You come at any time you walk in the door, right? But these kashrus organizations have people that are vigilant because otherwise they're a mess up. So I give one very simple example. You have let's say non-Jewish workers. You have a dairy restaurant. Let's say you have a dairy restaurant. Okay, now they could use knives there or whatever for their own stuff. So let's say they have treif meat, right? They're eating a sandwich, whatever. They cut it with one of these knives. They say, okay, they wash it off. Very good. Yeah. So maybe it's not a problem if nothing's hot, right? If nothing's hot, the knife wasn't used. The knife wasn't hot. The meat, let's say, wasn't hot. So basically, you probably have to cut a sliver around, and you can eat the rest of it. But if you're not on top of it, what can happen? These things can happen, right? And you can tell them 100 times, don't use these knives or whatever for your own, for your own food or whatever. Use your own utensils, right? Or use plastic or whatever. People will say, yeah, but you got to be on top of them. Someone has to be there, and see, because easily you could have screw ups and whatever. So some people also, let's say, not so vigilant. They want to keep kosher. They want to eat. Let's say they go to a non-kosher place. Meat, dairy, it doesn't matter. It's a problem someone's seen you there, obviously, right? Because if you look like an Orthodox Jew, that'd look bad, right? But let's say, they're there for a business meeting. Let's say, yeah, they're there for a business meeting. So they say, I'll just eat a salad. Yeah, I'll just eat a salad. Now, you have, if it's a meat place, the whole thing, everything is treif there, right? So you got to say what could be wrong in a salad bar. Well, you have dressings, that aren't kosher. You can say, okay, let's say, I just have plain salad, right? So you have, there are onions there. Onions are definitely something sharp. So if it's something sharp, then I have an issue where, whatever that knife was used for, it has that status. In other words, if it was a dairy knife, wasn't used within 24 hours, which means the taste is stale. I used that dairy knife to cut this onion. I can't use the onion for meat. Yeah. Well, what if the knife you used is treif? So if the treif wasn't used for 24 hours, it doesn't matter. The fact is now that onion is treif, so you can't use the onion, right? So you got issues with that, and even a bigger issue, you got issues with bugs. Right? Bugs are probably more serious issues. And some people will say, right? Some people will say, well, we don't eat bugs. Things aren't buggy. Yeah, if you don't check, you'll say, I don't eat bugs. Okay? Yeah, that's if you don't check. Obviously, there are things that are buggy. Leafy vegetables are buggy, right? You have to check them, right? 100%. 100%. They are buggy. So therefore, even if you get around the other potential issues, which are going to be hard with these, silverware, cutlery, whatever you want to call it, that are used, for meat and other things. So that could make everything else non-kosher. So if a person's in that situation, obviously, you try and get out of it, if possible. Otherwise, you can't eat there. There's nothing. Want to drink water there? Okay, right? You drink water there. You can have a soda there. Yeah, but again, even with that, and even if everybody there knows you're not eating, right? 100%, everybody knows you're not eating. Yeah, it looks bad, right? It's called Mar Zion, right? It's a bad scene, so to speak. What does that mean? It means someone's going to think they see an Orthodox Jew in a trade place and going to say, oh, it must be permissible to eat. Must be permissible to eat there. Even if they don't eat anything, right? The whole thing looks bad, right? or it totally looks bad, right? So therefore, going into a, can a person go into a trade restaurant just get a drink, get a soda, let's say? Yeah, it's probably less of an issue, but again, people see you there. People see you there, then it looks bad, right? Totally looks bad. I once went into a McDonald's here, and most McDonald's are. It's probably the only place where you can have an absolutely super treif. McDonald's according to the Torah. Why? Kosher meat, kosher cheese, putting them together, right? So usually the meat is kosher, the cheese is kosher, right? So I mean, you do have a few of them that are kosher. They don't use real. Even if they use cheese, it's not real cheese, right? It's whatever. It's like I don't know, soy or whatever. Or they don't use even that they don't use that, but whatever. So anyway, I'm walking in, and the security guard there. The security guard says, "Well, this restaurant's not kosher." I said, "Is the bathroom kosher?" They said, "Whatever, he's doing his job. Very good. He wants to warn somebody that, the place is strafe. Okay, yeah, very good." So again, using a, let's say a bathroom in a non-kosher place. Okay, yeah, that's not necessarily a far Zion problem, right? You got to go, you got to go. There's nowhere else to go, so whatever. No one's going to think they may not let you use the bathroom because they want you to buy something before you use it. Okay, but you're not a customer there. But let's say you can use the bathroom. Yeah, they let you use the bathroom. Okay, does that look bad? It doesn't look bad. You're only using the bathroom. You're not doing anything else, right? But there is a whole question, right? There is a whole question whether you're allowed to even just buy a soda there. Yeah, can you just buy a soda there? Now, what? Yeah, we'll make it easy. Let's say someone has an ulcer. If they have an ulcer, they have to eat, right? And let's say it's a dangerous situation. They can even eat trafe because it's dangerous. Yeah, a dangerous situation. So again, a person, let's say they see an Orthodox Jew and wolfing it down in a trafe place, right? So the only permissibility would be unless they're dying. Right? Could you eat tray food if you had nothing else to eat? Yes. Yeah. But a person has an ulcer, so they have to eat. Otherwise they can die. Yeah, okay. So that's a different, that's a different issue. But Mari Zion is a very serious prohibition. Right? In other words, people seeing you in a place where they think, oh, this might be kosher, right? This actually might be kosher, so therefore they're making a mistake. If you use the restroom at a restaurant, you leave the bathroom, say a shir yotzer, yeah, 100%. Doesn't matter if it's kosher restaurant or not, the bathroom's the same. Bathroom in every place is going to be the same, right? More stalls, less stalls. One bathroom or more, whatever, it doesn't matter, right? That's not going to matter. Wherever you have to go to the bathroom, let's say, even let's say a person can't wait, they have to go in the bushes somewhere. It's not to say a shir yotzer. Yeah, what if you have no water? Okay. Right, so you have no water. Okay. Yeah, so even if you had to go in the bushes, you still say the blessing. You still say the blessing. That can happen. Right? That's certainly we'll get gross here, but whatever, that can happen. Yeah, a person just has to go. You have no choice. Right? You find a bush, whatever. No one sees you. Okay. Yeah, you can certainly do that. And you would make the after blessing afterwards. So it doesn't matter where you are. Essentially, you can't make the after blessing, when it's around. You have to go far enough away, so there's no odor, there's no smell. But otherwise, yeah, you would make the after blessing there also. So anyway, that's the idea about my Zion kashrus. One other thing I would mention just about kashrus, and that is, it's not something I would mess with. Yeah, in other words, if you can stick to, let's say, stronger, kashrus organizations, that's what I would do. I would, there are some people who say, well, it's kosher, I can eat it. One thing I'll mention, sometimes people will say, well, I saw on a certain product, whatever it was, had a K on it. Okay, it doesn't mean anything. right? You don't know who put it on there. You don't know what rabbinic supervision it is, etc. So a K doesn't mean anything. Someone said, what if it's an R, for trademark? Well, that has nothing to do with kashrus, right? And one other thing also, even if you have the best rabbinic supervision on any product, it doesn't necessarily mean it's free from bugs. It's also another thing people have to keep in mind. In other words, let's say chickpeas. Person buys canned chickpeas. Yeah. They say kosher, right? Best rabbinic supervision. Great. Yeah, it doesn't mean it's free from bugs. You still have to check them. Yeah, you still have to check them. Or a person buys, any, chickpeas, beans, green beans. The whole question if it's frozen, you really can check them. Yeah, very hard to check if they're frozen, right? But even if something's in a can or whatever, and it's properly kosher, so depending what it is, doesn't mean it's free from bugs. They say, why don't they check it for bugs? Because then the price would go through the roof. They have to check everything that and they put it in a can. They say it's according to them, according to this kashrus organization, it's free from bugs. It's going to cost you even more, right? Because it takes time. It takes time to go through it and check them and whatever, right? So again, just depends what it is, but just because it says it's kosher does not mean it's free from bugs. Someone asks, okay, we're going to say blessings in public. Yeah, not a problem. Even if men are around. Yeah, also not a problem. Also not a problem. You say a blessing wherever. A man's got a bigger issue, let's say. Let's say if they're women, they're not dressed properly. Yeah, non-Jews or Jews for that matter, doesn't matter. Right? To make a blessing in front of them is problematic. So better to look somewhere else, turn away, if certainly if possible, then make a blessing around someone who's not dressed modestly. It could be at your Shabbos table also. Yeah, let's say, I've had this issue a few times, right? You make kiddush and there's somebody there, right? A woman, right? We'll make it easy. A woman not necessarily, dressed properly, right? Or even better, even if they're dressed properly, let's say a married woman who's Jewish doesn't have her hair covered. So really, you can't make a blessing. A guy should not make a blessing if a woman's hair is not covered. Really. So what do? So you look the other way. You look in a different direction. You can't turn around. That would be obviously obvious. that'd be pretty bad because then they see you're making kiddush, but your back is turned to everybody else. You can't do that, right? So you have to look or focus on something and not the person, right? Look down, have your eyes closed. I don't know, something where you're not looking at the person because really it's forbidden to make a blessing. For against whatever. If there's a married woman there, her hair is not covered. Right now, what about an adult that's not married? A woman's not married. She doesn't have an obligation to cover her hair, so that's not a problem, right? If she's not dressed appropriately, low V-neck and whatever, and arms aren't covered, that's a problem. To make a blessing against that is a problem. So either you're going to make the blessing with your eyes closed or your eyes to focus somewhere else. And that would take you out of the problem. Now, that would be whether you're in your own house or whether, you're anywhere else, right? You're in a restaurant. You're in a kosher restaurant and there are people there not dressed properly. So you got to be careful when you make blessings, right? Or what you're looking at when you make the blessing, right? If you close your eyes, very good, better. Certainly better when you turn your back or turn aside or, whatever, right? So that applies anywhere. That applies anywhere. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if it's in your house, all the more so in your house, even if outside, right? Certainly even outside. Someone asked for the rabbi say the person would have more concern violating Shabbos more than murder of another man. So the question is that someone said a person had more concern violating Shabbos more than murder. Yeah. Murder, desecration of Shabbos, if you would get warned for the right category, if you would be, if there was a Sanhedrin, if there was a Jewish Supreme Court as well. Yeah? What's the punishment? What's the punishment of desecration of Shabbos? The punishment of desecration of Shabbos is death. right? Death penalty. Now again, we don't give out death penalty. Death penalty was really never given out. Anyway, but it is, so people ask if death penalty was never given out, so why, um, what's the point of saying you get death penalty? Say that even though death penalty was never really given out, right? Nonetheless, it's a very severe prohibition, extremely severe prohibition. So desecration of Shabbos is death penalty. Murder is not death penalty, right? Murder is not. It's bad. Don't get me wrong. It's definitely bad, right? It's definitely bad, and it's not something if you repent. Well, even let's say you don't repent. Person murders somebody, cold blood, on purpose. Yeah, you don't lose your portion of the world to come for that, right? By desecration of Shabbos, you lose your portion of the world to come, right? You get spiritually cut off. That's the punishment, right? One punishment is death, right? You would get the death penalty, all things being equal. You would get the death penalty if you were warned for the right category, right? You had to be warned before you did it, and it has to be the right category, and you would need the Sanhedrin to be in existence, i.e., the Jewish Supreme Court. Very good. Otherwise, you don't get death penalty. But in the same verse, it says you are going to die, and you get spiritually cut off. You don't see that by murder. Murder's bad. Don't get me wrong. Murder's bad. It's one of the big three. You have to, you're not allowed to do. You have to die rather than transgress it, right? One is murder, one is idolatry, one is immorality. So if a Jew or non-Jew put a gun to your head and say, kill this person, I'm going to kill you, you have to die, right? But it's not death penalty. You don't get spiritually cut off, even if you didn't repent. Yeah, Shabbos, you get spiritually cut off, right? But Shabbos, you lose your portion in the world to come. And not only that, that's the great Shabbos, like you have no God. It's like it's like you're saying God doesn't exist. That's why for secular Jew becoming religious, two things you tell them to do at the very beginning: start keeping Shabbos and start keeping kosher. Kashrus because you got to get all this garbage out of your system in order to be able to listen to Torah. Shabbos, you desecrate Shabbos. It's like you have the status of a non-Jew. That's bad, right? For a Jew, that's bad. Yeah, and it's a very, very serious prohibition. So therefore, therefore punishment would be death penalty, and punishment would be getting spiritually cut off. So for most people today, even though they desecrate Shabbos, they don't know what they're doing. So it's a very severe prohibition, right? Even for a secular Jew to say, certain things, if a secular Jew does, you can't say, wow, they're Tino Shadis, but they don't know what they're doing. They get a free pass, right? Not everything they're going to get, or less of a pass, right? Meaning they're not going to get punished as much. Okay. Yeah. At the end of the day, though, it's a very severe prohibition, right? Intermarriage, very severe prohibition. Then you don't get a free pass. Regardless of what you know or you don't know, right? Every Jew knows, you're not allowed to marry a non-Jew. Yeah. They'll say, but you're not allowed to marry a non-Jew. Yeah. Most Jews know that, especially if you're associated with the synagogue. Yeah, they may say, doesn't really apply today, doesn't really matter, I don't hold my Torah anyway, okay. But if you ask them, bottom line, no buts. Again, A or B, are you allowed to intermarry according to the Bible? Yes or no? No buts, right? The answer is no, right? They are going to say no according to what the Bible, quote unquote, the Old Testament says. Okay. Look at, some people may say, but it doesn't apply. But I didn't say. I'm not interested in answers. I'm not interested in Webster's 8th definition. Yes or no? It's a very simple question, right? Yes or no? That's it. Don't give me but. There are no buts over here. Yeah, but it's much more serious, in that sense because you use your portion of the world to come. That's why it's more serious. Yeah, murder you don't. Murder you don't. There's also another fallacy out there. Just throw this out there while we're on this. People think the worst prohibition of eating treif is pig. Yeah, that's the worst. That's the worst prohibition when it comes to kashrus. That's not true. It's one prohibition. Yeah, eating a fly intact, let's say, or a bug, or even smaller than a fly. Yeah, and the bug is intact, that's 4 or 5 or 6 prohibitions. 5 or 6 prohibitions in one shot. Pig is one. People say, but pig is the ultimate, not a kosher thing to eat. Okay, because you need two things to be kosher for an animal. You need chewed cud and have split hooves. So pig has one of them. Camel has one of them. Sometimes the rabbits have one of them. Okay, but everyone's going to associate kashrus with something that's straight with pig. Okay, yeah, pig is straight. Very good. Yeah, if I eat, no matter how many slices of pork you eat, it's one prohibition. It's one prohibition. If a person ate a whole bug, they didn't even know it was there. Doesn't matter. They ingested a whole bug. It's 5 or 6 prohibitions. Worse, right? Most people obviously not aware of that. Yeah, someone asked K on Welch's. K on Welch's, there's no verification of it. K says it's kosher from who? From who? There are certain things they have, chaf K, looks like a kuf in a certain way. That's a legitimate kashrus organization. You got triangle K. I wouldn't tell people to eat it, right? I don't think it's good kashrus organization. You have, you have the OU. Unit of Orthodox Rabbis. You have CRC from Chicago. You have, you have the VOD in Massachusetts. Let's say, you have different ones in Florida. In other places. A K doesn't mean anything, right? If you see it on anything, a juice box, Welch's, whatever, grape juice is more of a problem in different ways, right? In different ways. So unless it has proper rabbinic supervision, if it's grape juice, not grape soda is less of an issue, right? Grape juice is more of a problem. Grape juice and wine, in general. But if that would have a K and nothing else, yeah, I wouldn't touch it. Certainly wouldn't touch it. If it was grape soda, I wouldn't touch it. Yeah. What if it had a K on it for water? So water, you can probably drink it. That's probably not a problem. If it's flavored water, yeah. Yeah, flavored water would be a problem. Anything flavored, right, needs proper rabbinic supervision. But a K doesn't mean, K doesn't mean anything. I can't, I don't imagine. I don't imagine it's got any, I mean, I can't imagine. Um, yeah, again, it's going to depend who is certifying it. Yeah, but again, even if it has a K on, it doesn't mean anything. Unless there's a proper, it's a proper rabbinic organization. Yeah, if it's a proper rabbinic organization that puts a K on it, whatever, fine. If not, you could have put the K on. Anybody could have put the K on. Doesn't matter, right? That's not gonna matter. Somebody asked, if you ate breads, okay, back to restaurants here. If you ate bread at a kosher restaurant, do you pay first or say because of Muslim first? I would say you probably have to pay first. I would think you would have to pay first. If they allow you to eat and then pay afterwards, then yeah. I would assume they're going to make you pay first. If they don't make you pay first, yeah, then I would say, but to make sure you don't forget the bench, to say grace after meals, then you say grace after meals first, then pay. I mean, you're not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere, right? So, they're not going to assume you're going to run out of you're going to run out of the restaurant without paying, right? So I would say to say grace after meals, and you don't have a problem according to anyone, right? And you won't forget because you have to say it. Right? You had to say it. So if you have to say it, you want to make sure you don't forget. You don't have to pay first. If they allow it, I would think most places are probably going to make you pay first. If they don't, it's probably better to pay first also. And then wash, and then when you're done, say grace after meals, right? Because once you've been served, your obligation at that point really, is to pay. Now, they could tell you, you can pay afterwards. They could tell you that, right? The issue is, the ones working there, unless it's a manager who has some sort of power, but anybody working there, they don't have power. They don't have power to say that, right? In general. If you tell me the owner says, yeah, don't worry about it, you can wait, You can say grace, you can bench, you can say grace after meals and then pay. Okay, he's got power to say that. If a general worker, there says, yeah, don't worry about it, they have no power to say that. They have zero power to say that, right? If if the manager comes over, you ask the manager, you say, listen, can I, do you care if I say grace after meals first and then, and then pay? Now the question is, does he have power? Now, if he has power, let's say, if he's got some level of power, he's a manager, should have some level of power, then that should be all right? But anyone who really doesn't have power, then what they say doesn't matter. Someone says we need to wash my machronim. If you wash, right, those are the afterwaters. That one of the reasons you wash is because people ate with their hands and things are salty, and you got salt in your eyes. It'd be a dangerous situation, etc. So the whole question if you wash for bread, this only applies by bread, or let's say pita, or if you ate 2 slices of pizza or something like that. Anything you have to wash for and say grace after meals, this would apply. Now, the question is that the reason that the rabbis gave for my machronim does not apply today. In general, does not apply today. So there are 2 opinions, 2 schools of thought. One school of thought is, if the reason doesn't apply, I don't have to say it. I don't have to do it, right? And the other reason, the other school of thought is, if what's the word? If the reason, even if the reason doesn't apply, that doesn't mean it's the reason, right? In other words, there could have been any number of reasons. The rabbis only gave 1, yeah, or they gave 2, but there could be 100 reasons why, right? So therefore, even if they didn't give the reason, that doesn't mean the reason they gave is the reason, right? So according to that school of thought, even if the reason doesn't apply, you should do it anyway, right? So now there's a question. In general, should you do it? So I definitely think a person should do it, men or women. Some women don't do it. I don't quite understand 100% why. But they should do it. So whenever you're at a Shabbos table and you have to get up and do it, okay, so what? Yeah, it's not a modesty issue. Certainly not a modesty issue. Yeah, and what if you're, in a restaurant, and the place to wash is like, it's a good 2-3 minute walk. You have to walk around and this and that. Doesn't matter, right? It's out of convenience. Someone will say, well, it's too far to walk, I'm not going to bother. Well, you should do it. Right? No matter where, if you have enough water, whatever, a person should do it. There's no reason why they shouldn't do it. Yeah, but certainly by men, they should do it. There's a question by women. There is a question by women whether women have an obligation to do it or not. Some women definitely do it, and I think they should do it. Others are more lenient. So you want to pin me down and say, does the person have to do my machronim? Yes. They have to do what they call the afterwaters before you say grace after meals. After you eat. Yeah. I think people should do it. I definitely think men should do it. I definitely think women should do it. Yeah. Is there an opinion women don't have to? Yeah. But again, I don't see why. I don't see why. It's not a big thing either. Just get up and wash. People have had to ask the question. I know people have asked the question before. You're in a social setting. You're by someone's Shabbos table, so maybe it's a modesty issue for women to get up. But other people are going to get up anyway, so it doesn't matter, right? You're not going to be the only one getting up. Other people will get up. Yeah, but even if you would be the only one to get up and watch, it doesn't matter. Right? That doesn't matter. It's not a modesty. It's not a modesty issue, and again, it should be done. Somebody asks, if a Christian or Muslim is honestly convinced, yeah, I love these questions, that their religion is the truth, and they had not much time to fact check, will still God punish them? Yes. God will still punish them. Yeah, in other words, even if we say Islam certainly is better in many ways to Christianity, at least in one reason, that they don't believe in idolatry. Okay, that's very good. But it's still a false religion, right? Still a false religion. Nonetheless, there's an obligation to search for the truth. God, the Or Chaim HaKadosh says on the it says in Book of Leviticus, right? It says that every person in their soul has the ability to find God. That's why I have 80,000 different religions. In their soul, somewhere, God programmed the person to want to search for truth. Now, there are 80,000 different religions. All these religions obviously are false, except for Judaism as we see it. Yeah? They may say their religion is true, someone may say their religion is true. Okay. Yeah? So all the other religions that are idolatry, death penalty. Religions that are not idolatry, still going to be punished severely there, unless they repent. There's a there's a problem. Certainly the Rambam says they have to go according to false religion. Can't go according to false religion. So if they didn't fact check it and they're lazy, yeah, why should God have mercy on them? Why in the world should God have mercy on them? Yes? Yeah, in either case, Christianity, Islam, any religion, doesn't matter. They don't have a chance to fact check. Why is that if they don't repent, and especially if it's idolatry. Yeah, we'll make it easy. Let's say it's idolatrous. They didn't get a chance to look into it. Why not? Why didn't they have a chance to look into it? Either they were lazy, that could be, or they still think it's the truth. So what, they didn't fact check it? How many Christians that are born a Christian fact checked? Fact check to see if it's true. The only time they fact check it to see if it's true is when they have questions. And once they have questions, they get no answers, or they're told you got to believe and you got to have faith and, all this garbage to push them off. Yeah, that's when they question, when they don't get answers. But if they don't have questions, if these things don't bother them, and they're happy being a Christian, yeah, they don't think there's anything wrong with it. They don't think there are any issues with it. Yeah, obviously God thinks otherwise. Yeah, if God thinks otherwise, they're in trouble. Yeah. And most people, guaranteed, most Christians don't know very much about their own religion. But unless they're searching in any other religion, if they're searching, yeah, they will get to the truth. Right? As the Gemara says, the person wants to go on the right path, God will help them. They want to go on the wrong path, He won't stop them. They're going to say, God has to convince them? God has to bring people in their lives to convince them? No mitzvah to do that. These things are obvious. But for these people, they're not obvious. Why not? Either brain dead. That's one possibility. They've been brainwashed, even better. Even better. Yeah, but even if you've been brainwashed, God gives you the ability to go against it. God gives you the ability to think for yourself. Right? So the question is, why didn't they fact check it? It wasn't important to them. Yeah, it wasn't important to them. To fact check. Why not? It didn't bother them. They're happy being that way. Someone told me, father once told them, what, do you think I've been lying to the church for the last 50 years? Yeah. Yeah. Is he going to look into it? No. Does he really care? No. So he's liable. He's liable. Right? No matter if he didn't fact check it or not, it should be obvious. But it's very comfortable. It's extremely comfortable being that way. Your friends are like that, other people are like that. Yeah, some maybe do a little bit more, they do a little bit less. That doesn't really matter. It's totally irrelevant. 100% irrelevant. At the same time, what would I say? That's very easy being comfortable. The only people who are going to fact check it are people who have questions. And once they start having questions, they don't get answers, then they end up leaving the church. Yeah? Then they end up leaving the church. So very good. Very good. And there are plenty of people happy being ignorant and not knowing anything and not, they don't want to rock the boat. They certainly don't want to rock the boat. But what do you do when you have questions and you don't get answers? You get frustrated. Then you start looking into other things. Then you start looking, other alternatives. How do people answer these things up? These seemingly contradictions. Yeah? So if they didn't have a chance to fact check questions, why? Right? I think, my personal opinion, for whatever it's worth, I think people are lazy, A. And B, I don't think they care so much. They're just happy, They're There's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. No one's going to rock the boat for anything. Okay, no one's going to be super religious. Okay, maybe some will be, some won't be. Doesn't really matter, right? Doesn't really matter. The only people who are going to question are the ones that have serious questions, and they're going to keep questioning more because they want truth. But you see, how many Christians out there want real truth? Right? If they want real truth, they're not Christians anymore. Yeah. There'll be no hides whether they convert or, I don't know, whatever else they'll be. Right? But they're not going to be Christians, 100%. They're not going to be Christians. Somebody asks, okay, follow-up question here. Somebody asks, the person's too stupid. No one's too stupid, unless you're mentally challenged. If you have a 25 IQ, God's not going to hold it against you. Right? God's not going to hold it against you. Everybody has the ability, right? There's a medrash. There's a medrash, person died, and he gets judged, and God says, so two questions God's going to ask. Either first question is going to be, did you learn Torah? Or the first question might be, were you honest in business, right? It's going to go one way or the other. It's a difference of opinion, which question you got first. So God asked the person, okay, did you learn Torah? He said, I don't have time. He said, or let's say better, you didn't give me brains to learn Torah, right? Exactly this question. I was too stupid to learn Torah. You didn't give me brains to learn Torah. So God asked him, okay, what'd you do to make a living? What'd you do for parnos? What'd you do to make a living? So he said, I was a fisherman. So he said, oh, very good. Tell me what you did. He said, I built these intricate nets. I went out, I went early. I did this, I did that. That's how I was able to make a living. So God says, I bet the same God who gave you brains for that probably gave you brains, right, to learn Torah. That's not an excuse. It's not an excuse. If a person's mentally challenged, I'm not going to say the R word because I don't get banned from YouTube, but we'll be politically correct, even though I'm never politically correct in general, right? If a person is mentally challenged, there's never going to be a question. Then they are too stupid to know. Then there's no possibility that they'll ever know. Whether they brought up as a Christian, a Buddhist, this, that, there's no way they can question because they don't have the brain capacity. They don't have the brain capacity. Again, it means they have a 25 IQ. Yeah. Take someone, whatever. Someone's got 25 IQ. We'll make it easy. They're mentally challenged, seriously mentally challenged. God's never going to have a claim against them. If they have a higher IQ, and they are able, to distinguish and make decisions and make good decisions, make bad decisions, not because they're limited in intelligence. Yeah, then they're in trouble. Someone can be less intelligent. Okay, they're certainly not mentally challenged, right? I know some people like that. Okay, they weren't as bright. Okay, does that mean you have to be so bright to ask the question? I don't think so. Especially when it comes to Christianity, there's so many things that don't make any sense at all, right? You don't have to have great intelligence to figure that out. But what's the problem? When they have great intelligence or less intelligence, unless you're seeking the truth, you're never going to ask the question. You're never going to ask the question. Yeah, it has nothing to do with intelligence. Because you see, there are people that I wouldn't call them, a Rhodes Scholar by any stretch. Well, there are people that, have come out of it. They've come out of it because it didn't make sense. I met really smart people that came out of it because, a lot of things didn't add up, but anywhere in between. It's not rocket science. Person has to be a physicist, to come out of it. And there are plenty of people that are very bright that don't think about these questions because it doesn't bother them. Well, they're extremely bright. Very good. Right doesn't necessarily mean you're smart in that sense, when it comes to these things. Because there are things that don't make sense. Even if they're very bright, they could have a PhD, pilot higher and deeper, or Papa has dough, right? They could have a PhD, doesn't mean anything. It just means they know one aspect of one subject, like 10% of one subject. Doesn't mean anything. People give it all the credit in the world. They worship someone's got a PhD, okay. A person has to write a 100-page paper and have oral exams. Okay, I'm not saying it's not work. I think people give it a lot more credit than it's worth, but okay. Yeah, you think someone was extremely bright. Yeah, if they're extremely bright, how can they not see this? If they're extremely bright, like in time of the Holocaust, Nazis, Yamach Shemam V'Zichron, may they rot, may their name be blotted out wherever they are. How do they not see this is a problem? To treat a dog better than a Jew. And who are the people who first joined the Third Reich? Hitler, Yamach Shemam V'Zichron, did not put guns to people's heads and say join or die. Who joined? Academics, doctors, lawyers. Yeah, they weren't the skinheads of today. They weren't stupid by any stretch. Yeah. Why do you think the Americans took them in after the war? Because they want to pick their brains, for, whatever knowledge they had. They weren't the skinheads of today. So how can it be? Someone can be convinced to treat an animal better than a human. Do you think they were brainwashed? Yeah, okay, Hitler was, a fiery speaker and orator and this and that, but guess what? A person has half a brain. Think. Does this really make sense? I mean, anti-Semitism is not rational. That's not the topic here. Totally, it's totally not rational. But I even get a big example, more recent, a few years ago, right? At least Stefanik. Anyone, saw what happened to the presidents of, Harvard, University of Pennsylvania, and MIT? MIT? You have to say genocide depends on the context, or you're often caught in picking head? These people could be 10 times more intelligent than I am. They're racist. Totally anti-Semites. 100% anti-Semites. They got what they deserve. Yeah. Total anti-Semites. Where did that come from? You say it's inbreeding, and Qatar spent all kinds of money putting these anti-Semites in these schools and blah, blah. Okay. These people are not stupid. 100% they're not stupid. They any different than what the Nazis said? And what and the people who joined the Nazis are no different. They're no different. They just happen to be in academic institutions. Yeah, presidents of academic institutions. They ain't stupid by any stretch. Yeah. Like I said, it's not, we'll call them out. They can be 10 times more intelligent than I'll ever be. Okay. Yeah. But you want to tell me genocide depends on the context? Really? You say about blacks? I don't think so. You say about Asians? I don't think so. Oh, it's okay to say about Jews. Where's the rationale? Because anti-Semitism exists. Okay, again, that's not really the topic here, right? But you have someone that intelligent can make such a racist statement? Yeah, because intelligence doesn't breed morality. Totally doesn't breed morality. But that's what it does. It can go crazy, right? So now, a person has 100 IQ. How can they not see the stupidity of Christianity in general, with all the contradictions? Islam also, right? Throw all of them under the bus. How can they not see that? How can they not see that? They can just say, oh, religion's open to the masses, and why don't I be religious, and this and that, and look what it does. Look what it does to society, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But they're not saying what the real reason is. That doesn't make sense. It's hogwash. Maybe some of them will say it, maybe. Maybe some of them will say it. That's a big problem. Again, so why aren't they looking into the truth if they're so smart? They're wicked smart, as we would say in Boston, right? Why aren't they looking into it? Because it doesn't bother them. These questions don't bother them. Why doesn't it bother them? Because they don't care. They're happy being mediocre and doing, maybe go to church once in a while. Maybe, they did communion. They did a few other things. Okay. But it doesn't bother them. People who want truth bothers them. Seriously bothers them. And when they get no answers, they get pushed aside, it bothers them more. That's when they start looking into other things. Yeah. So unless a person is, seriously mentally challenged, that goes out, that goes by the wayside. That question 100% goes by the wayside. Yeah. And that makes sense because everyone's got the opportunity. The question is if they want to. They want to see it. If they want to see it, they can see it. People can make up all kinds of crazy things and try and convince themselves. Like, I had a Jewish college student tell me many, many years ago, you could prove that Torah is true 99%, 1% free will. Only a Jew would say that. No Jew wouldn't say that. I mean, this is one of the stupidest things I ever heard. I said, 99%? I could prove? So I asked them, I said, okay, you ever write term paper? I didn't do that. So I was a history major. I had to write a lot of term papers, yeah? So I said, what do you do when you write a term paper? So you have a thesis? Very good. You got to prove the thesis. Okay, you spend the majority proving it. And I said, what do you do at the end? He said, write a conclusion. Beautiful. I said, what if you have contradictory information and you leave your conclusions as doubts? Oh, you can't do that. Otherwise, you'll fail. Ah, very good. Yeah. So what do you do? I said, what do you do in that situation? He says, well, you got to look what the people say, what these different books say, whoever it is, whoever these experts are, whatever proof you're bringing, and you have to evaluate the evidence. You have to evaluate the evidence. So I said, great, say it again. He said, you have to evaluate the evidence. I said, say it again. He's like, what is this, a test? I said, you just told me you have to evaluate evidence. If you evaluate the evidence, it's 99% true. You don't have 1% free choice. Then you're an idiot. You say 99% of the time, I'm playing roulette, right? And 99% of the time, it's rigged that, 13 black's going to come up. Yeah, I'm going to be a multi-billionaire, even though it's 60%. I'd be a multi-billionaire, even though it's forbidden to gamble. Okay. That's even 60%. If I have 60% that it's true, you can say, okay, I got 40% that's not true. Okay. But you tell me 99%? That's kind of silly. Kind of a silly argument. Yeah. Person has to work 12 hours a day to survive. There's no time to factor. That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. God put in the soul, let's make the point very clear. God put in the soul of every person who wants to search for truth. You know what? It's like anything else. If it's important for you to do, if it's important enough, even if a person works 12 hours a day, if it's important enough, you'll do it. Yeah? It has to be important for you to do it. Person, let's say, their parents. Yeah, and then, they're busy. They're very, very busy. Okay. So, they can use that as an excuse to say that's why I don't call. Yeah, I'm very busy. Okay. You can't take 3 minutes to call. Take 2 minutes out of your day, see how things are going. It doesn't have to be a long conversation. Just say, hi, how are you? What's going on? If it's important to them, they'll find the time. Like anything else, if it's important to a person, they'll find the time. Even if a person works 12 hours a day, guaranteed, even if they're working 12 hours a day, how much time are on the phone watching videos or sending texts or whatever? Probably a lot. They average about 4 hours a day. Yeah, if you got that amount of time, doesn't matter if you work 12 hours a day, and you got that amount of time to do that, then you have enough time to fact check. If you have enough, you if it's a priority, you'll make it a priority, right? You say a person has to work 20 hours a day. They don't have time, right? This could go on forever. Whereas, they only sleep 3 hours a day, see their family, 1 hour a day, this, that. Okay, we could go down that road. That's not going to butter the biscuit here. Bottom line, if it's important to you, you find the time. It doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter what the issue is, right? Whatever the issue is, if it's important for you to get an answer and understand what's surrounding it or whatever, what the issue is, you'll do it. Why are you going to do it? Because it's important to you. Person works 12 hours a day and they're busy and they're tired and this and that. I guarantee they have time to do other things also. That's a total waste of time. Yeah. So if it's important to them, they'll do it. If it's not important to them, they won't do it. There's no excuse. I'm going to throw all of these people under the bus. 100%, I'm going to throw them all under the bus. A person has time in their lives to find out the truth. And if they don't want to, okay. If they don't want to, that's their choice. But God's not going to, God is not going to use that as an excuse. So I was too busy, right? I just told you the story of the fisherman. Yeah, the fisherman said, I don't have brains. He didn't give me brain capacity. Yeah, not that he didn't have time. You could have that time, busy being a fisherman. You could be dead tired. You have to get up early in the morning, right? Whatever. Right? A person's a farmer, same thing. Very early mornings, you get out there, it's freezing cold and who knows what. And, you got to take care of livestock, got to take care of, other animals, who knows what. Yeah, you're dead tired by the end of the day. Okay. Yeah, I guarantee, with all the money I don't have, I'll put it down on the table and say, even if a person's that busy, and they have a smartphone, I guarantee they'll spend 10 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 8 minutes there. Now I'm not talking about being on the phone, either texting or watching something or scrolling. If they have time for that, they have time to look into this. And why, So that to them is more important than looking into that. That's what God will say. But I gave you time. You had all this other time. And then think about all the hours that come out of it over a person's lifetime. So imagine hundreds, thousands of hours. You can say, I didn't have time. Scotty, give me more time. Now, Scotty, we got to go to Ward 3. 35 seconds. Captain, what do you want? We don't have any engines. Scotty, just get us out of here. Yeah. What do you mean you don't have time? That's Star Trek. Anyone didn't know. Yeah. What do you mean you don't have time? God's going to paint that very clear, and the person's going to be embarrassed, totally embarrassed in that world. You say, you didn't have time. God's okay. Let's make a quick calculation. God says, according to what I see, you wasted, 53,000. That's being generous. Yeah. 53,250 hours of scrolling on your phone and watching things and texting. You had 53,000 hours, probably a lot more than that. Yeah, like I said, I'm being generous here. 53, let's say it's 53,525 hours. God figured out. And he said, well, you had 53,000 hours you did with something else. You could have looked into it. You had the time. You can't tell me you didn't have the time. Forget about Scotty over here in Star Trek. You didn't have time. Yeah? Sorry, I didn't have time. God says, I don't think so. I got 53,250 hours over here that you could have had time if you wanted to. It was important to you. Time's not going to be an issue. People can find time if it's important to them. Right? What's not important to them, they won't do. If it's important to them and it matters, guess what? They'll find time. Busy people, they'll find time. No matter how much you're on the phone, how much this, how much you're on the road, you'll find time. Right? If it's that important. If it's not that important, it's like it's like anything else. Yeah. You do the things that are important. That you're gonna want, that you want to look into, that you want to do. Why? It's important to you. Doesn't matter what it is. Right? Yeah, I don't talk about forbidden things, whatever it is. You will find the time because it's important to you. And you got to make the time to do it. So if it's that important, you'll make the time. If it's not that important, you won't. So what if you work 12 hours a day? You work 20 hours a day. You work 15 hours a day. You still have time. Right? That won't be an excuse. Right? What if they're born into it? Right? I get this question a lot also. Look at all these Hindus in India. Yeah? What about them? They're all going to go wiped out. It's idolatry. True? Isn't that sad? Yeah, it's sad. But who told them to worship cows? Yeah, I had to go convince them not to worship cows. Yeah, they were born into it. But you see, people who are born into things, they can leave. They can get out of it, right? Anyone who's listening who's a former Christian knows they can get out of it. Might be painful, might cause a lot of problems, but they can get out of it. A person's born a secular Jew. A reformer conservative Jew. You can't get out of it? I'm living proof. I know other people living proof. Yeah, if you want, if you're searching for truth, God will help you. If not, He doesn't stop you. But this is the problem. As Orach Chaim HaKadosh says, it's in every soul, every person, Jew, non-Jew. It's in their soul to want to search for truth and search for God. God put it in their soul. That's why you have 80,000 different religions. They all went off the rails, okay. But everyone wants to believe. A lot of people, let's say, want to believe in a higher being. Now, you got atheists out there, okay. And it looks like the atheists have bigger sway. They got, they're very loud, extremely loud. But the last time I checked, atheists are only 400 million people. Yeah. Compare that to Islam and Christianity and the Hindus, it's nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. Right? Hindus, Christians, and Muslims are most of the known world. About 2 billion people, one and a half, something like that. 1.5, 2 billion people together. All different sects of Christianity, whatever. Atheists just talk a lot. Right? They talk a lot, they get more visibility, and they're loud. They're extremely loud. I would have thought the numbers were much higher. Yeah, so I was also surprised that the numbers are not that high. But at the end of the day, it's very hard to be an atheist also. Yeah, I had someone troll me on that and say, no, this doesn't prove this doesn't prove that. But if you look at things honestly, I don't see how you can look at nature and the human body saying it's random. It's just, there are too many things that are placed in exact proximity. Yeah, that if any of those things goes wrong, throws the whole body off. Yeah. Someone gets the flu, they can't move, right? They got a fever, throwing up, other things. They can't eat. Yeah. Or anything, any little thing can throw the whole body off. Tell me nature is random. Bees take pollen and all these things like that's just totally random. Very hard to say, right? But they have their own ideas. Yeah, they want to perpetuate their own ideas. Like I'm sitting at a table no one can see. Like you think when it came by itself? It didn't come by itself. Yeah, well, sorry, made by itself. Yeah. Someone had to make it. Someone had to design it. It didn't come out of nowhere. And things that are a lot more complicated, like the universe. It's just a random Big Bang, and this and that. Science is no reason why the universe is still expanding, right? Einstein proved that, and Stephen Hawking proved that. They don't have scientific reason why. They don't have mathematical reason why. They don't have any proof, but they still refuse to look at the beginning of Genesis. Yeah, because they don't want to believe that the Bible's true, because then it has other repercussions. Okay, but they don't know how it happens. They don't have a good reason exactly how it happened. But how can you say like all that is random? In nature, like, it's been this way forever, etc. That how's that random? Totally random. They have their ideas. They have their own belief systems or whatever. But the human body itself, I mean, you look at the human eye, you have so many things going on in the human eye, that like say that's just random, and say, okay, man and woman get together and you got sperm, you got the egg, you develop a child, child develops, yeah, that's nature. Okay. People only question certain things when kids come out messed up. You have someone that's born without ears or worse problems. Worse problems. I know someone had a child born without a brain stem. I mean, lived very long. I mean, lived whatever, a number of years, couldn't do anything for themselves. That's when people ask the question. When a child comes out, like, yeah, my daughter just gave birth to thank God, to a healthy baby boy this week, and um, found out after baby was small, maybe about 5.5 pounds or whatever, smaller than her other two, and um, what ended up happening was after she gave birth, they saw the placenta was split. Placenta was broken. Yeah. Now they didn't know that, right? They didn't know that, but if they would have seen, the baby's not developing, the baby's not growing, it's a problem. Right? I don't know exactly what they do for that, right? But they didn't know that was the problem. They didn't know. Sorry, they didn't know that until the end. Now, if the placenta is split, that means the baby doesn't grow as much. It's not getting enough nutrients from the mother. Yeah. Now, if that was like 2 months earlier or 3 months earlier, it could have been just a very small split and then got bigger, before she gave birth. But let's say this was 3 months ago. Let's say it was a major split. Let's say it was a major. Now that's dangerous. That is dangerous. But the baby could die because the baby doesn't develop. Yeah, it'll come out very, very small. Yeah. So that's dangerous. That for sure is dangerous. But they had no idea. They had no idea. Baby was developing, whatever. It's just smaller. Okay. But if that would have happened 3, 4 months ago, yeah, that would have been a serious problem. That would have been a serious issue, however they deal with it. Right. But see, no one questions, you have a normal child. Okay, some are bigger, some are smaller. Depends how the person carries it. Well, okay. Yeah. When something comes, let's say something, thank God forbid, something happened, the brain, child, let's say even better. Woman's giving birth. Woman's giving birth, and the child doesn't get enough oxygen, whatever, right by the birth. So cause problems. You can say up until that point, everything's fine. Not even saying where the with cord gets around the child's neck and all that, and also, it causes problems. But nobody questions when the child comes out all right. Nobody says anything. I mean, they're thankful, and women will say, never giving birth again. Like this is it. People in the older generation, that's it. They knocked them out. They said, wake them up in the morning, told them, okay, this is what they had. Whatever. They have to go through, natural labor, whatever. like it is today. It's totally different. Okay. Yeah, but when do the questions come? When, a person has, God forbid, Down syndrome child, or worse problems, or worse problems. Yeah, that's when it's questioned. But, when it happens on a regular basis, that, children are born healthy, no one says anything. No one says, wow, what a big miracle. No one says that. That's why, even a doctor say, the best of doctors go to hell. Why the best of doctors? Tell me all doctors go to hell. No, because even the best. Why? Because they can see miracles all the time and they don't recognize it. They don't recognize it. I mean, how could you not? I mean, it's, you see enough and you get used to it. Okay. But, I always, every time my wife gave birth, so, follow the baby afterwards, just make sure, it doesn't get a, label of like some Arab or who knows what. So anyway, but you see, 2 ears, a nose, 2 nostrils, 5 fingers on each hand, 5 toes. It's a miracle. Yeah. No one questions when it's normal. Well, the question, you should have had it, not had it, whatever. Okay. Right. But no one's questioning about the normalcy. Yeah. And that's in itself a miracle. In fact, two people get together or however it works. You have that child for 9 months and it's getting sustenance and it's tucked away. Nothing should happen to it. And, whatever. And then it comes out and can't do anything for itself, and then sucks the parents dry for life. That's the way kids are sometimes. Yeah, but in general, each step along the way is absolutely miraculous. Right? They'll say, but that's the DNA, right? That's the DNA of the father, it's the DNA of the mother. Father gives this, the mother gives that. The child, very good. I know, a little bit about biology. But even so, when things go good, no one says anything. you know, a child comes out, with different issues or whatever, that's when, people may say something. But it's miraculous. I think, so to say like, oh, that's just part of nature. And what if it goes awry? What if child's born with, severe diseases and other things? It's your bad luck. Yeah. Nature shouldn't be that way, but it happens. Why does it happen? Because it happens. They don't have an answer. Right? They don't have an answer. It happens. Right? But to look at nature itself and the human body, that should be enough. That should be enough to prove there's design. Yeah, and Hobsbawm speaks about this quite a bit. It speaks about Shar Bechina, I think, in the gate of if you're gonna define Bechina, whatever. He speaks about it. He speaks about it quite a bit. Just like you can't look at the world and think the world is happening by itself. And that everything is random. It's impossible. There are too many things that say it's like Abraham came on the scene at the age of 3, the age of 40, whatever, or even older. He said there's an absolute world of design. There must be a designer. I have to serve the designer. Yeah, people think that's backwards and whatever. But to see that the world in general is just a world of I mean, it looks like it is chaotic in many ways. We made it chaotic, but the fact that there's so many things organized in nature and the way it works, and the human body, those two things alone would tell me that there's a designer. Right? But most people don't care either way. They'll say, yeah, it's part of nature, but they never thought about it. And even intelligent people never thought about it. And see the intricacies of it, unless you're into that type of stuff. But then you could say, well, that's my religion, science, or whatever. Without putting it to a higher power. But how did you get there? How did this design stay the way it is for so long? And been that way? They don't have an answer. We have an answer. Right? But you can't say it's chaos. And it's just totally random. Right? Maybe you see why people die young and other things you say, oh, they're bad luck, that's random. Okay. Yeah. But when you look at nature in general, and you look at the human body, it's very hard to say it's all random. Very hard. Right? They'll have their own excuses, whatever they say. But it doesn't bother Biscuit over here. It's kind of lame. I understand why they would do it. I definitely understand why they would say it, because they don't want to believe in God. They don't want to believe in something divine. Yeah, it makes sense. Right? Totally makes sense. Yeah, somebody asked, poor people that starve and have no internet. Um, again, if they're brought up a certain way or they think a certain way, everybody has that ability. There are no excuses. There are no excuses. There may be some people out there that are under total onus, beyond their control. Yeah, maybe it's beyond their. What about, let's say, someone grew up, parents never told them they were Jewish. They didn't grow up without any religion. Yeah, not even Dianetics or whatever it's called. You're on Hubbard or whatever. Yeah, they grew up with nothing. They didn't know at all they were Jewish. They're exempt. They're totally exempt. They should believe in God and at least keep the Noahide laws. Because but God's going to punish them for not keeping Torah mitzvahs. They never knew they were Jewish. Let's say they find out they're Jewish. That's a different issue. But if they're under total onus, yeah, 100%. I don't know if this is total onus. This is not total onus. You want to tell me poor people starve and have no internet? That total onus? There's no possible way they could have figured it out? Even just keeping the Noahide laws? I don't know about that. I don't know about that. You have to give me like a very, I would agree. If there's no possible way, if there be no possible way whatsoever for someone to find out, yeah, then they would be exempt. Then God can have no claim on them. But most people are not going to be in that category. There will be some. There may be some in that category. I'm not saying nobody. I mean, I did say nobody, but if they're under total onus and it's beyond their control, then yeah, they would be exempt. Are homeless people liable that they can't check? Why is a person homeless? No one starts out being homeless. Yeah. Usually, it could be a lot of different reasons why they're homeless. Now, some people that are homeless have mental health issues. Someone who's got, mental health issues, are they going to be liable? No. It depends on what the mental health issue is, right? Yeah. But, for certain mental health issues, they won't be liable because they're not capable, right? Okay. A homeless person does not start off homeless, usually. Could be, under bad circumstances, like, turned on them in different ways. They end up they end up in the street. Yeah. They didn't start out that way. So you tell me right now they have no access, they can't do anything, and whatever. Okay. Right now that might be the case. What about before? What about 5 years before? They couldn't have looked into it? Let's say they're homeless for 20 years. Okay, what happened before that? Before that, they weren't homeless. What were they doing? Now, if you tell me they're drug addicts, other things, and that's how they became homeless, okay. Yeah. Even before they're a drug addict, they still could have looked into things. It depends what stage and what it is. Right? But you're right. If they're homeless right now, yeah. So maybe they're exempt. Maybe. Maybe they're exempt. But what happened before they were homeless? I would think, my guess would be, for what it's worth, if before they were homeless, they were quote unquote normal, yeah, then they could have looked into it. So why didn't they look into it before that? Now, if you tell me they had mental health issues, they were drug addicts, there was abuse, there were okay. Maybe that's a real onus. Could be. Depends on the circumstances. Right? Depends on the circumstances. Right? Time should not be an issue. And they didn't have time. Being on the street should not be an issue because beforehand, they could have checked into it. Let's say they could have checked into it beforehand. Yeah. If they couldn't or whatever, if they're total owners, good. So there will be cases if it's beyond their control. Okay. I would agree with that. Right? How many cases are you going to bring me that's the case? I don't think it's a majority. I for sure don't think it's a majority. People could look into it. Unless there are other things going on. Right? Unless there are other things. So again, if a person, it's totally beyond their control, there's no possible way they could have done it good. Right? But I think you're grasping at straws when that could happen. Because for most people, it's not going to be the case. Right? There are a lot of homeless people. Good. Third countries, there are a lot of homeless people. Okay. Their kids grow up on the streets. Okay. Yeah, so maybe they'll be exempt. Maybe. Yeah. But if they didn't start out that way, then they'd be liable. In most cases, I think they're going to be liable. It's again, I'm not going to say every single case, right? Every single case, but there's There are cases it'll be under total onus, right? It's beyond their control. They can't help themselves. Okay, so that would be the case. But I think in the vast majority of cases, I think 99% of the cases, not going to have any excuse, no excuse. There could be cases like that, okay, but it's not going to be the majority. It's not even close. I don't even think it's close. There'll be some people like that, but for most people growing up in the Western world, I don't think they have one excuse. I don't think they have one excuse. Now, by time, not how they grew up, not this, they could have looked into it. Again, it can be really bad situations. Okay, there are people live in bad situations. Drug abuse and other, physical abuse and psychological abuse, all kinds of things. Okay. Yeah, so now the mental health is questioned. Okay. But I'm talking about before that happens. I don't think the bottom line, I don't think too many people are gonna have excuses. That's my take. They're not gonna have excuses. Right? There will be people that'll have excuses. Okay. There'll be people like that. Very good. Not the majority. I don't think it's majority. Right? I don't even think it's close. I don't even think it's close. I think, people are brainwashed. Okay. But God gave you a brain to figure it out. So what if you were brainwashed? Anyone listening now, whoever's going to say it, they're not brainwashed. Yeah. I mean, maybe they were brainwashed, but they came out of it. So it's possible. How God's going to judge each person, people more brainwashed, less brainwashed. Again, when it comes to no-eyed laws in general, people are going to be shocked, I think. Because they're going to get upstairs and God's going to say, why don't you keep basic laws? So I never heard of them. Okay, so God said, let me list some of them. Don't steal. What's your excuse over here? You did this, you did that, you did the other thing. You're going to say you didn't know it was forbidden? No. It doesn't matter if you didn't hear about the no-eyed laws. They're basic things, basic human things everyone has to do or not do. So how can you make an excuse for that? Yeah, I can say, well, euthanasia is not really murder. They were suffering. We pulled the plug. That's murder. They'll have an excuse. They'll have a whole system of why they believe that and why it's a good thing and why people shouldn't suffer. Okay, I'm all for people not suffering. Well, I mean, you can kill them. Yeah, I mean, God can easily say that. He said, you killed them. You murdered them. So there's not going to be any excuse over here. For basic things, basic human things. But you're asking about idolatry. Well, who told anyone to believe what the Christians say? A lot of things don't make sense. A lot of things about Hinduism don't make sense. A lot of things about Islam don't make any sense. Yeah, person has half a brain. Literally, if they have half a brain, they should figure that out. What about social pressure? What about societal pressure? Family pressure? Okay, that is something. 100%. You know what? You gotta have a backbone. Family pressure is a real thing. It's got, my guess would be, person will say, well, what do you want? Family put a lot of pressure on me. I couldn't change. It was just too much. God says, okay, let me show you what you could have done. Let me show you what the soul of your soul is that you could have done this. You could have stood up to family. You could have been stronger. You don't want to be. You don't want to rock the boat, this and that. Okay. Family pressure is a real thing. There's no question. Societal pressure is a real thing. Also, that doesn't mean you should have you don't have backbone. Doesn't mean you can't fight against society. Look what Abraham went through. You say, I'm not Abraham, but he put it in the world for us to fight against society, to fight against these crazy ideas. He gave us that ability. Person doesn't want to because they're lazy, they don't want repercussions. Okay. Doesn't mean it's not true. It doesn't mean they shouldn't have gone further. Everyone according to what they could have done. Yeah. And so they'll be judged accordingly. But, these things are real. Okay. The question is, what do you do about it? You say I was, I crumpled. Yeah, I was just, I couldn't stand up to it. That's not going to butter the biscuit. You could have. You didn't want to. You didn't want to rock the boat. You didn't this. You didn't that. Where do those people go? They're in trouble. If they don't repent before they die, idolatry, they get wiped off the face of the map. The soul gets obliterated like a dog. Yeah. The soul gets obliterated, Jew or non-Jew. Yeah, potentially. Potentially. Why get obliterated? Again, for a non-Jew, it's easy to understand. Because they went against basic human laws. They didn't repent. So what you got to do with them? What you do with them? Doesn't give them another chance, usually. What's their punishment? If they live, if they'd still be alive, what would be their punishment? Death penalty. Not for everything. Not for everything's death penalty. But if you go against the no-hide laws, all things being equal, you shouldn't have a portion of the world to come. So what does that mean? You don't have a portion of the world to come. You get obliterated. Your soul gets destroyed. And all the more so, let's say by idolatry. All these religions that are idolaters, what's going to happen to these people if they don't repent? They get obliterated. There's not going to be left, nothing left of their soul. So again, I've had people say, isn't that cruel? It's cruel. Yeah. Well, that's the way it is. That is the way it is. It's God's judgment. You had, these are obvious things you didn't see. How did you not see it? So that gets back to the whole discussion. Yeah. How did they not see it? They don't want to see it. They weren't interested in seeing it. Not because of brain capacity, not because of anything else. If it's the true owners, they couldn't know it. Okay. You don't know not to steal? No, that's different. Uncle Sam takes too much. That's stealing. That's stealing. Stealing, death penalty. Not all the no-hide laws are death penalty. Yeah? But if a person, what should happen to them? Their soul get obliterated. That's what will happen. Sad. Those that don't you have compassion? I have compassion. What can I do? Convince the whole world why they should worship cows. It's not my job. They want to know, what it means to be a non-Jew according to the Torah. Okay. So then you go to someone who can teach you. Very good. I have to look for them. These things are obvious. Well, why should God have mercy on them for things that are obvious? Mentioned this many times. Right? You got to protect yourself. So you're your own, you're your own worst enemy. Okay, it's your choice. You're making the choice. Society brainwashed me. Guess what? There are a lot of Russians that got brainwashed to be communists, be atheists that came out. They came out of it. It either converted or became no-hide. I'm not going to say it's a lot, but there are many. There are many. The vast majority are stuck in being an atheist. Okay. Whose fault is that? Right? Right? Whose fault is that? You can say that's the way they were brought up. That's in society. Okay. I agree. That mean you can't come out of it? Now, are you going to be liable for that? You'll be liable for that. For sure you'll be liable for that. Yeah, again, unless it's total ownership, and it's against your will. That's different. Right? We can come up with some scenarios that a person wouldn't be liable. Okay. But in this case, most people, because these things are obvious, are going to be liable. It's sad. I agree. It's definitely sad. That's why look at these tens of millions of people. You're right. And most non-Jews are going to get wiped off the face of the map. They are going to get wiped off the face of the map, and they won't have a portion of the world to come. It's also sad. Plenty of Jews. Plenty of Jews like that also. Yeah. It's also sad. That we can educate our own and do outreach. Right? Not, we don't do outreach with non-Jews in general. Yeah, they want the truth, they'll find it. But for them, it's a lot easier because keeping these laws are much, they're universal. Not like something, I have to convince people. I should have to put all these signs all over churches all over the world, right? To get them to come out of Christianity or whatever. It's obvious. They don't see it. Why don't they see it? They don't want to see it. You got plenty of people also, they're in much more serious trouble. And they keep trying to answer, messianics or whatever, why what they're doing is true. With all their convoluted reasons. That's worse. That's worse because they don't make any sense. They do want truth, but they go in totally down the wrong path. Yeah, and now they're trying to convince people with all the crazy things that they say. They say, oh, it doesn't mean this. Oh, it doesn't mean that. Oh, you don't know how to read Hebrew. Oh, you don't know this. I've heard enough arguments. They're stupid. They're stupid arguments. Yeah, but they want to see the truth. Yeah, so they're much worse trouble. Much worse trouble. All right, I'm going to stop here. This every Tuesday and Thursday. 10 o'clock Eastern Time, 5 o'clock Israel Time. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Michael Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com. Beyond Orthodox conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I get videos, Q&As. Ethics of My Fathers, Book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, rabbichaimkoffman@gmail.com, RBBICHIMCOFMAN @gmail.com.